Paula Pete Works here, and this is the second anniversary video for the channel. In this video today, we'll be talking about Vivi, or Nefertari D. Vivi, and how she will join the Straw Hat crew as their vice captain, but with a twist. I think when she joins the crew, at some point, she will become a cat. So going off of that, a lot of people might think I'm going to say she'll be a cat because of the pawpaw fruit. This is not the case. I know where people are coming from because one, people associate the pawpaw fruit with a cat based on the thought bubbles of Nico Robin and Guinea. Because when the power is first described by Kuma himself, Nico Robin thinks about a cartoon cat. Then when the power is described by Guinea as the actual fruit, as the actual object, along with the fish fruit model as your dragon, Guinea thinks of a cartoon Asian dragon and a cat holding out its paw. However, I don't think this is going to be the case, because if the pawpaw fruit were to be compared to any animal at all, it would be the bear. Why is this? Because, well, Bartholomew Kuma's name is Kuma. Kuma in Japanese means bear. When Kuma is first introduced, we have Zoro fishing in the river for salmon alongside a bear. This is then played off of in the Kuma flashback because we have an adult Kuma in the river, being the bear, trying to catch salmon as well, but he paws them away due to his ability. So the fruit has always been compared to that of a bear, even more so when you consider S-Bear. S-Bear having the lineage factor of Kuma and being a clone of Kuma also has the pawpaw fruit, and of course he is a bear. Now, a thought that I have had, a thought in the community, was that the fruit itself affects the user's hair. This is not the case, and we find out that Kuma's hair is just like that. It's bedhead. The reason why we don't see that when he first eats the fruit is because as a child, he is bald. He doesn't have any hair. So there's no hair to become these bedhead barriers. And because S-Bear is a clone of Kuma, he's got the same bedhead. So that all makes sense. Another popular theory that people go to as to why Vivi will have the pawpaw fruit is because people think that Nefertari D. Lily had the pawpaw fruit, and that's how she supposedly scattered the poneglyphs. We don't actually know that, so I really wouldn't put that much investment into that theory. And this is a spoiler, but I do think Kuma will pass on in the story, especially considering the recent events on Egghead. And I do think his power will go to somebody else who will join the crew at some point. I have done a video on this person, and as an aside, it is very interesting that this person as well at one point in their history did have bedhead. So please check that video out. It's a good watch. And with that, we're going to focus on why I called Vivi a cat. So there is a devil fruit that Oda has been holding on to for a very long time, but has never used. This devil fruit appears in concept in One Piece Green Secret Pieces. One Piece Green is the 4th data book released on November 4th, 2010. In said data book, there is a sketch of Marguerite from Amazon Lily, and she has the ability of the cat fruit model black cat. And there's a depiction of her as a black cat Zoan in her hybrid state. Why is this interesting? Well, if you look at Alabaster, right? The Egyptian allegories cannot be ignored, especially when you consider Pell and Chaka. Pell, being the user of the bird fruit model Falcon, is most likely an allegory to Horus, and then Chaka, being the user of the dog fruit model Jackal, is most likely a nod to the Egyptian deity Anubis. So, with that being said, Why is a black cat important? Have you ever heard of the Egyptian deity known as Bastet? She is associated with the home and domestic life, as she protected women and children from evil spirits and disease. She is also associated with fertility and childbirth, women's secrets, the afterlife, dance and song, and was originally depicted as a lioness. However, this changed over time, and she is more so associated with a black cat, either appearing as a full black cat or as a woman with the head of a black cat, usually with a blue nimbus, which is one of those Egyptian headdresses that you see a lot. So that's very interesting at the start, especially with the dual depictions. Kind of reminds you of a Zoan, doesn't it? But moving on, Bastet was also associated with perfume, as her name in hieroglyphics translates to that of a bass jar with the feminine ending of T. These jars were very important as they were perfume jars, but they were also used for holding makeup and were used for bathing and hygiene, which is very, very interesting, and we'll talk about that as we move on. Also, in some depictions, she has a son that she had with the deity Path, and his name is Nefertim. Sometimes Nefertim can be considered the son of Basset's sister as well, Sekhmet. And Sekhmet is the more violent of the two, in which she is depicted as a woman with the head of a lioness. Bastet, as I said before, was also depicted in this way as well, but due to her demure and feminine nature in comparison to Sekhmet, she is often depicted as a black cat or a woman with the head of a black cat. Their father is the sun deity Ra. It is believed that Bastet was a bit of a daddy's girl, as she would ride with Ra on his boat as he pulled the sun through the sky during the day. And then at night, she would turn into a cat to protect him from the deadly serpent attack. But Sekhmet is a little different, as she was created from the fire of Ra's eye as he looked upon the earth. Ra created her as a weapon to destroy humans for their disobedience and not following him in accordance to the rules that he has set up, called Ma'at. So moving on from that. Now, after that long Egyptian history lesson, you may be asking, how does this all relate back to One Piece? Well, let's break it down. I think in this scenario, Vivi is Bastet. I know a lot of people have akined her to Bastet by giving her some sort of mythical Zoan of some sort, but based on the theming of Alabasta, seeing as how we have Chaka and Pell, that's most likely not the case, and she is just a normal black cat Zoan, seeing as how Pell is a normal Falcon Zoan and Chaka is a normal Jackal Zoan. I think in this setup too, Pell is both Horus and maybe Ra, but it's most likely that Ra plays a few different roles in Vivi's life, or there are a few allegories to Ra in Vivi's life. So one in part could be Pell, as Pell is her protector and does act like a father towards her. She does sail on a ship to Mary Joas with Cobra, her actual father. And then we have Luffy, of which she does sail with as well, and does act as protector in a way in several situations in the story. Not a literal protector, but more of a diplomatic protector. But more obviously, much like Ra, Luffy in the story of One Piece is a sun deity because he is the awakened user of the human fruit model Nika. And as you know, Nika is a sun deity in the lore of One Piece. Also, on top of that, the Thousand Sunny, a ship literally called the Sunny, meaning sun, can fly across the sky using Coup de Burst. So, if she does rejoin, which I think she will be accompanying Luffy, the sun deity, on a ship that can fly across the sky. And in a roundabout way, you can say, seeing as how it's called the Sunny with a guy who can take the visions of the sun deity on it, one could make the association that the Thousand Sunny is pulling the sun across the sky, especially when there is a guy helming the ship with a literal depiction of the sun branded into his chest, who was a part of the Sun Pirates in Jinbei. So the sun is pulling a boat named the Sun, carrying the sun across the sky. She is also a protector because in her flashback, she protects the nation of Alabasta from going to war with the Drum Kingdom in chapter 142, because Wapol really slaps her at a levelly, but she brushes it off and says it's fine. So she's a protector in that way as well. What's also interesting too is that Basset was said to protect Horus in Egyptian mythology, but I think in terms of Pell, those roles are reversed too, and he's just a protector for Vivi all the way around. It's especially interesting too because Pell gives Vivi a piggyback ride, and they do fly across the day's sky, which is kind of like Basset riding with her father Ra in a boat as he pulls the sun across the day's sky. But I did say Pell was much like Horus, and this is true, as Horus and Anubis are protector deities. They are siblings, and in a lot of depictions, Horus does similar things to Ra, as he too can traverse the skies and cause day and night. However, how this relates back to Pell is that he has done similar things in the narrative, because Luffy did ride on his back at one point, so you could say he did pull the sun or the sun deity across the sky. And when the giant bomb was about to blow up Alubarna at the end of the Alabasta saga, it was Pell who pulled the bomb up into the sky so that it would detonate, saving the city. And when the explosion occurred, one could say that the explosion looked like a sun. So you could say that Ra, or Horus in this case, pulled the sun across the sky in two different situations. So those are some interesting comparisons there. Another interesting comparison in which I think she's going to be related to Basset or become Basset is because Basset's son is named Nefertim. That sounds like the family name of Vivi, Nefertari. But what's also very interesting is that in Egyptian mythology, Basset protected Ra during the night. This is very interesting because the true nature of Vivi comes out during the night of Whiskey Peak, in which we find out all we need to know about the Alabasta saga moving forward. That there is a kingdom named Alabasta, and they are being covertly attacked by an organization called Baroque Works. In accordance with that, we also see Vivi fight during Whiskey Peak, and we see two different versions of this. In the manga, she weaponizes her hypnotic outfit in accordance with her skill of dance and femininity. These are things that are associated with Basset, femininity and dance. But in the anime, she uses perfume in order to hypnotize the opponent. Basset is also associated with perfume. So either way, it all comes back to aspects of Basset. Continuing on with the Ra, Basset, and boat parallels with Vivi in the story of One Piece, I find it very interesting that Vivi always finds herself in the accompaniment and protection of bird characters throughout the story. When we are first introduced to Vivi for real in Whiskey Peak, we see that she has a pet duck named Karoo, whom she's known since childhood and uses as a mount. Following that, when we get into Alabasta lore proper, we find out her relationship with Pell. Pell, of course, is the user of the bird fruit model falcon. But then, in the story proper, due to some recent events, she is now within the protection of Big News Morgans, who, of course, is the user of the bird fruit model albatross. And his ship is a sky ship in which is being held afloat by seagulls in a balloon. So again, Vivi, Basset, finds herself on an airship being pulled across the day's sky. So that's very interesting, especially when you consider Morgans himself is a deity in the One Piece world in his own right, because whatever he posts in the paper is what the people hear. He tells the story of the world. He tells the truth as far as the people of the world know it to be so. So in this situation, it is like Basset riding with a aspect of Ra across the sky in a boat. So winding things back to the start of the conversation, remember when I said that the deity Basset had a sister in Skhemet? Skhemet was the more violent of the two, and while Basset was depicted as a house cat, Skhemet was depicted as a woman with the head of a lioness. So do we have a parallel to that in One Piece? Well, kind of, in a way, because it is made clear to us that the reason why the Nefertiti bloodline is the way it is right now is because of the brother of Nefertiti D. Lily. We don't know his name yet, but we do know that he continued the bloodline of the Nefertari after Lily's disappearance. So it is very likely that if anything was taken from Lily and presented into Vivi, it would be this concept. I made a video when I first started the channel, which makes it very appropriate for the time that I'm posting this, since it is the 2nd year anniversary, that Lucy is the illegitimate son of Nefertiti D. Cobra. And I say this because they look too much alike for that to be a coincidence. What bolsters this is this whole Basset theory, because I think between Basset and Skhemet, Lucy is Skhemet, because in Egyptian mythology, like I said before, Ra used Skhemet to carry out his judgment on humans, to punish those who didn't abide by his laws for disobeying him. What does Lucy do throughout the entirety of the story? He carries out the will of the world government, the deity of the One Piece world. He carries out their orders and eliminate those who disobey their laws. So he is Skhemet. Whereas Basset was a house cat, Skhemet was a lioness. Same thing here. If Vivi is to be a user of the cat fruit model black cat, it is likely that she will be a very good narrative foil to the violent Rob Lucci, who is the user of the cat fruit model leopard. And of course, a leopard is a more dangerous creature than a common house cat. And we see this through the various interactions he's had in the story, as he uses his own abilities to make his fighting prowess more effective. So much so that in the current story, he has become awakened. Another tidbit that I heard a long time ago is that if you look at Rob Lucci's name, it's kind of an inverse of what Skhemet is, because Skhemet was born from the fire within Ra's eye, right? But if you look at Rob Lucci's name, his name literally means Rob the Light, as Lucci means light. So Rob the Light versus created from light. The funny part about Rob Lucci's name is that he very much lives up to that name based on what he does in the narrative, because in the Enies Lobby arc, it is his duty to make sure that Robin gets processed by the world government. So, reason why this makes a lot of sense for his namesake is because later on in the time skip, Robin gains the nickname of the Light of the Revolution by Bunny Joe of the Revolutionary Army. So, in being a very influential factor in trying to get Robin executed, Rob Lucci was trying to steal the light from the world and steal the light from the Revolutionary Army. There's also the twist of him trying to kill Luffy, as Luffy, as you know, in the time skip, is the sun deity because he has a human fruit model Nika. So in two situations, he is literally trying to snuff the light out of the world by having Robin get executed and trying to execute Luffy himself. Another interesting point, and I don't know where this would go, but when we are introduced to Vivi's duck, the type of duck that Karoo is said to be faster than a leopard. or a panther, depending on your translation. I don't know why that is said, but it's interesting that there's a parallel to Lucy there, because of course he is a user of the leopard fruit. So the duck that Vivi rides is naturally faster than he is. Don't know where that information goes, but I found that to be a very interesting parallel. However, moving on from that. So now we're finishing up our comparisons between Vivi and Bastet before we move on as to why Vivi should be the vice captain of the Straw Hat crew. There's just some miscellaneous things that I found intriguing that I wanted to point out. So, in Bastet's depiction as a woman with a cat's head, she is often depicted wearing a blue nimbus. I find this kind of fascinating because if Vivi were to assume a hybrid state, her blue hair would be left unchanged, much like, say, Who's pink hair when he transforms into his half saber-toothed tiger form. So, in that way, her blue hair would act like a nimbus in a way. Moving on from that, it's also very interesting, and I don't really take art requests that seriously, but I do like to look at the whole animal of things because sometimes sneaky hints can be left in places. So, in chapter 610, we do see Vivi cleaning the floor as a bunch of house cats are supervising. Now, mind you, these are Siamese cats, but they are still house cats, so they're still on the same level as a black cat because they're both domesticated cats. Another interesting thing, and this is for all you old heads out there, but there was an ongoing theory way back in the day that Vivi, when she was a part of the Straw Hat crew throughout the Alabasta saga, that she was sort of a foil to Nami. I find this kind of interesting because, as you know, Nami's nickname is the Cat Burglar and her animal depiction is the cat. So it would be kind of funny if in this situation, whereas Nami is a cat burglar in name, Vivi, who has the opposite temperament to Nami, can become an actual cat, which I find just an interesting thing overall. But to that, we have to wait and see. But now on to the reason why she would be our vice captain. Now, the first red flag people often jump to when you say Vivi should be the vice captain is that Zoro's the vice captain. Shut up, you. You don't know anything about One Piece. You're a fraud, a sham. But, dear viewer, here's the rub, though. Zoro has never been officially crowned the vice captain. He's described as a combatant. I see this on the wiki. I don't know where they got that from. I remember there was a breakdown of what each Straw Hat was, and I can't find that for the life of me. But in the live action adaptation, Zoro is described as a first mate. That's not really official, but it is what it is. I will say, based on the type of character Zoro is, combatant makes a lot of sense because he is one of the main fighters in the crew, and his entire backstory and character revolves around the art of fighting to be the best swordsman in the world. So in order to do that, he has to face all challenges to naturally grow better. Fighting foreign foes makes you more adept in the art of swordsmanship, and it makes you better know yourself. So in that way, I get it. I really wouldn't take the live action at face value for everything, but in a literal sense, since he's the first one to join, it's a I guess, even though there's no confirmation from the manga or the anime for that being the case. But if you want to take that, I'm not really going to hold that against you. It is what it is. So on one hand, we have combatant. On the other hand, we have first mate. But neither of those are vice cap. The reason why, from a narrative standpoint, I think it's very on brand for Vivi to be vice captain, not so much for any character points, which we'll talk about in a bit, because of the saga that we're in. Because you see, in the Alabasta saga, a funny thing happens at least twice. You see, when we are introduced to Bragi and Dory on Little Garden, Bragi and Dory are both co-captains of the giant pirates. This is the first time in which we are privy to a pirate crew being run by dual captains. What makes this all very suspicious is that we in Egghead right now are being reintroduced to Bragi and Dory, and they are back on the seas acting as dual captains yet again. Furthermore, at the same time, we find out more about the Nefertiti family being a part of the D-Clan, and we are seeing Vivi reacting to the news via Vegapunk. So I just wanted to point that out to tie things up. But they are not the only ones that are interesting during the time of the Alabasta saga. Moving on to the second point. So the second point is that the entire point of the Alabasta saga is to stop Baroque Works, correct? Baroque Works, for the most part, works on a system of twos in their upper echelon. The only one who doesn't have a partner is Mr. Two. But for the rest of them, even the boss is broken down into male and female, and both of them are equals within their unit and rank. So Mr. 5, Miss Valentine's Day, Miss Merry Christmas, Mr. 4, Mr. 3, Miss Golden Week, Mr. 2, then you have Mr. 1, Miss Doublefinger, and finally at the very top, you have Miss All Sunday and Mr. 0. So with that being said, you can say that Nico Robin was the co-captain or vice president of Baroque Works. So in two major points of the Alabasta saga, you see that an organization can be run by two people. And for all that time, of course, Vivi is a part of that. So it would only make sense that she becomes the vice captain when it comes to officially joining the Straw Hat crew. And seeing as how the arc that most involves her has this as a basic driving principle, I would say. Moving on from that, it's also very interesting that the position of second in command or vice captain does appear in a flashback of hers, because when she is joining the Sand Band, depending on your translation, there are a whole bunch of names for them, but Koza's group, when they are kids, she wins in a fight against Koza. Koza does pronounce her second in command or vice captain. Even though this is a street game, it's just a bunch of kids, I think it's an important point because, like all Straw Hat backstories, they point to their position. Well, at least most of the time, but that's for a different time. We won't talk about that. But for the most part, yes, what's in the backstory points to what the member will become once they join the crew. And in this case, with this particular backstory with Koza, it points to her being a vice captain within an organization. The other points to her being a diplomat, because like I mentioned earlier, when she was accompanying her father to the Lovely, Wapple slapped her, but in order to avoid a national incident, she simply turned the other cheek. This shows you that she has always been a diplomatic person, thinking about others above her own self. And this takes us to how she compliments Luffy in the narrative. Luffy and Vivi are two sides of the same coin, where Luffy's approach has always been very action first, questions later, which has been very successful throughout the story thus far. There are moments, especially those moments in which Vivi is a part of the crew, but there have been some moments where she wasn't, in which that approach doesn't work. For example, when Nami comes down with the 5-day disease and the crew makes their way to Drum Island, it is Vivi who pleads with the people of Drum Kingdom to stand down in order to grant them passage so they may find a doctor. If it wasn't for Vivi in this moment in time during Drum, Nami would have surely perished. What's impressive about Luffy and Vivi's relationship is that Luffy actually listens to Vivi, though there have been times like during Alabasta which he will contest her judgment because he knows this isn't the right course of action to take at that moment in time. So their relationship is quite complex and very interesting, seeing as how he does respect her opinion and Vivi grows to respect his opinion, which is why I think she is necessary to be on the crew, especially seeing as how the crew's reputation has inflated to become that of a Yonko organization. Because like in Wire 7, there are times in which the brute force way isn't the right way, because the point of the matter that happened between Usopp and Luffy could have been avoided if someone could actually get to Usopp and explain to him exactly what was going on and why the Mary couldn't sail anymore, and reassure him of his position in the crew. Because at that time, it's highly believed, based on the clues that we get in the narrative, that Usopp connected his worth to the crew, to the ship. So if the ship doesn't matter, by extension, he doesn't matter, because he's the one who got them the ship in the first place, and he has been taking the ship into his own responsibility ever since repairs were needed on the ship. So the ship's condition is an extension of his self-worth. But if someone was there to actually explain to him that this is not the case, and they simply need a new ship because it is impossible for the ship to be fixed, then the fight between Luffy and Usopp would not have happened. But seeing as how that presence was not there on the crew, you only have Zoro, which I will say Zoro is important here because as the disciplinarian in that moment, he did stand on business and say a true fact about the organization as a whole, that Luffy is the captain, he is the leader, and what he does say goes. But again, that could have been handled in a lighter, easier way from someone who is more experienced in dealing with those type of situations. And that person, of course, is Vivi. One thing I will say about Vivi that a lot of people rag on her for, that's not really true. She's not a dumb pacifist. When the problem has no other option but violence, she will resort to violence, even though it's not necessarily in her nature to use that as a first resort. Because when seeing Crocodile face to face for the first time, she wastes no time and is not hesitant in the slightest, and actually decapitates the main antagonist of the saga in a swift, effortless motion with no remorse. That says to me that she is complex. Where Luffy can talk things out, it's very obvious that violence is at the forefront of all of his actions. He can be considerate. He's not without consideration, but his actions speak louder than his words. Vivi is sort of the polar opposite, in which she won't resort to violence unless that's the only option. But when she does resort to violence, it is very lethal. Because, correct me if I'm wrong, she had no knowledge that this man was a Lokia. So she was actually out for blood, not knowing that the attack would be futile. That is amazing. So that's why I think she is a complex character in that way. And that is why it's very funny that both of them are now a part of the D clan, because they complement each other very nicely. But moving on to what I think the time skip did for her. So as the 2 years rolled on and the original 9 members trained in their respective crafts to come back together to be a stronger crew in order to take on the new world and find the One Piece, I believe another person was going under some training of her own. As we know from looking at Cobra after the time skip, he has gotten on in years, which means most likely that Vivi has had to step up in his place and dictate some things that he was not able to do. Therefore, she most likely was the one running the country, or at least being prepped to run the country, because it's the natural succession of things. With that being said, this gives Vivi the experience of handling an entire nation. So when she does rejoin the Strawhat crew and become their vice captain, she will have the know-how of how to actually organize and tend to the various territories that the Straw Hats have been sworn to protect. Because based on every other Yonko organization in the story so far, these Straw Hats are claiming territories, two of which most likely being Wano and Fishman Island. But none of them have any experience in protecting or perhaps even stepping in to negotiate operations for various needs. Vivi has that experience because she's been in that type of position, presumably over the past 2 years, or at least being prepped to be in that position officially when the time comes. So I think in handling the bigger reach of the crew as a whole, Vivi is going to be important, especially when you consider that the Straw Hats have a grand fleet as well, seeing as how Vivi is the princess and trying to be the queen of Alabasta. She too most likely has knowledge in prepping and organizing units of the Alabasta army, especially seeing as how she knows Koza. So she most likely would be a great help in organizing the various branches of the Grand Fleet if her services were needed there. So finishing up here, I just want to talk about some miscellaneous things that you may not have thought about when it comes to Vivi. So when you look at the Straw Hat crew, there is a theme through most of the characters, like 8 of them, in which you have a very unique situation in which these particular characters are the only ones of their kind in the world. Zoro, for example, has invented the 3-sword style. Brook, based on his situation, is a unique creature. There's no other talking skeleton in the world quite like him. Chopper is a reindeer who is eating the human fruit. Robin is the only one in the world who can read the poneglyphs, etc., right? Vivi is like this as well, because not only is she a D-Clan member, which is pretty unique in itself, but she's the only D-Clan member to both be royalty and to be a kind of celestial dragon adjacent character. Because we know from Doflamingo of all people, because, well, Vivi in the narrative doesn't ever seem to go away. He says that the Nefertiti family are the only family of the original 20 kingdoms that did not ascend to the honor of becoming a celestial dragon. So her plate is being stacked pretty high. On top of that, if her physical abilities are of any concern, I would just like to remind you all that Vivi was a fairly high-ranking member in a bounty/mercenary organization within Baroque Works, being the partner to Mr. 9. So off the bat, she does have some prowess. She even swam from the middle of the ocean to the shore of Whiskey Peak, which is kind of crazy because you wouldn't expect to have somebody who is then seen to be a princess. That's weird. Now, recently in chapter 1116, we see that Vivi has a missing poster, quite a few missing posters made up by Igaram, presumably. This is very interesting in terms of world building because I cannot recall any other time we have seen a missing poster for anyone. I think this is a gateway for said missing poster to become a wanted poster, because the Chekhov's gun here is that who is going to spill the beans of Vivi once being highly associated with the Straw Hat crew. And the only one who knows at this point is Wapple. And Wapple and Vivi are in the lap of Big News Morgan. So that bit of information could just slip out in casual conversation. And Morgan's, being the opportunist that he is, could just run the story. But if her missing poster does turn into a wanted poster, I think it was going to be a parallel, much like with Sanji, in which she's wanted alive, because it's likely based on the pictures that we see in Eames' sanctuary. Emu wants Vivi for whatever purpose. Vivi is important to them. So most likely that's going to come up at some point. But to continue on with some more miscellaneous information, thanks to volume 76 of the SBS, we know that Vivi's specific number is 5.5, which is weird and kind of relates back to Luffy because the numbers that he's most known by are 5 and 6 because of Go Moo, his dough fruit name. So yeah, her specific animal resemblance is a dove, and her blood type is F, the same as Luffy's. The interesting part about her is that, much like Brook, she has had 2 colors, but she didn't get to keep one of hers because her original color was white, and that has changed to gold. The reason why that's kind of cool for her is because, of course, her traveling companion Karoo can be seen as a golden duck, and there is gold in her Jolly Roger. Yes, she has a Jolly Roger that she technically does not know about because the Jolly Roger only appears in Igaram's nightmare of her becoming a Straw Hat pirate. And this is shown to us in chapter 215. This is one of the weirder outfits for Vivi because it technically doesn't exist, yet I've seen it referenced in a bunch of promotional art for games and such. It's lifted. You always see her in like a pirate outfit, kind of like this. So it's weird that a outfit that doesn't technically exist is referenced so much. And I often wondered, what is up with this tattoo on her arm? I don't know where that comes from. I've always thought that this design was going to be used in some official capacity within the narrative because it's so weirdly distinct for her. On top of that, there's another outfit that I can't get out of my head because it does have merchandise. It's the red dress and the big white hat that she wears in volume 24. Because this outfit reminds me of Blackbeard. Because as you may know, Blackbeard has 3 pistols on his waist. Vivi has the same thing here for no reason at all. And I have always found that really peculiar, especially too, this outfit as well is referenced a lot of times in, I want to say, mobile games, because that's where all the PNGs come from that a lot of people use in their thumbnails. So that has always just been very peculiar and has always been a real sticking point to me that there's more to her to come in the story, especially seeing as how, again, she never actually leaves the story. She's always relevant. If it's not a cover story, it's an art request of her somewhere in the chapters. So with that being said, this has been my 2-year anniversary video. And I have to thank all of you for following me thus far. As you know, if you've been following me for a long time, I do post a short every day, and it kind of warms my heart that people do come to watch every day. The fact that people come every day really does warm my heart. And I've often thought sometimes as I make these things, what if I'm a part of someone's daily routine? Like when they're getting ready for school or when they're getting ready for work, they come and check my channel at 7 a.m. CST and they see that I posted something new. And I'm just there in the background talking as they get ready or as they're on their commute. It's just something that's really heartwarming to me because it's funny to now be in the position that so many people were in for me growing up, watching One Piece content on YouTube. So I just want to say thank you all. I've grown exponentially since I first started posting. In my first year, as I was at 500, and we've now grown to nearly triple that size, being nearly 1,500 subscribers strong. And yeah, I will just appreciate you to keep supporting me as I keep pumping out more and more content. And as promised, there will be new content every day because I've gotten a knack for making these shorts and I don't intend on stopping anytime soon. So with that being said, that has been my 2-year anniversary video and my Vivi theory video. Thank you all for watching. And like I always say now, give me your thoughts.